Story 1. The Man at the Construction Site. A few years ago, I worked as a night security guard at a construction site on the edge of town. It wasn't exactly a glamorous gig, but it paid well enough, and most of the time, it was easy money. The site was an unfinished high-rise, and at night, it was eerie, dark scaffolding, half-finished concrete walls, and cranes looming like giants over the skyline. The only sound was the wind whipping through the skeleton of the building and the occasional creak of metal beams settling. The job was simple. Walk the perimeter, make sure no one was trespassing, and check the inside of the building every couple of hours. The place was deserted after 6 p.m., and I had the whole site to myself. The problem was the neighborhood had a bad reputation: gangs, drug addicts, people looking for a place to crash. I'd had a few run-ins with junkies trying to break in, but nothing I couldn't handle. Until that one night. I'll never forget it. It was close to midnight when I started my second round of the site. I had my flashlight in one hand, radio clipped to my belt, and a heavy wrench in my jacket pocket just in case things got dicey. I had a weird feeling as soon as I stepped into the building. There was this heaviness in the air, like the entire place was holding its breath. I started on the first floor, making my way through the concrete hallways, checking every corner, every shadow. The place was a maze of exposed wires, piles of lumber, and unfinished walls. It smelled of wet cement and metal, cold, industrial, lifeless. My footsteps echoed with every step, making it sound like someone was following me. When I got to the second floor, I thought I heard something. It wasn't much, just a slight rustling sound, like a plastic bag, or maybe some paper fluttering in the breeze. But there was no breeze. Not inside. I shined my flashlight down the long, narrow corridor, sweeping it from side to side. Nothing. Just concrete and darkness. I told myself it was probably a rat or the wind shifting something on the scaffolding outside. I kept moving. Halfway down the hall, I heard it again, this time louder, closer. It wasn't a rustling now. It was footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing just out of sight. My heart kicked into overdrive. I stopped walking, holding my breath, listening. Then I heard it, the sound of a door creaking open. Now, here's the thing. There weren't any doors installed yet. Every doorway in the building was just an empty frame. But the sound was unmistakable. A slow, painful groan of metal hinges being forced open. I gripped my flashlight tighter, the beam shaking slightly in my hand as I scanned the hallway. Nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I pressed forward, walking faster now, wanting to finish the round and get the hell out of there. I'd almost convinced myself I was just being paranoid when I heard it again, a door slamming shut. The noise echoed through the building, loud and clear, like someone had just kicked it closed with force. I spun around, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins. I grabbed the wrench from my pocket, holding it tight, ready for whatever or whoever was messing with me. Then, from the far end of the hall, I saw him. At first, it was just a shadow, barely visible in the dim light, standing in the doorway of one of the unfinished rooms. He didn't move. He just stood there, his body half hidden behind the wall like he was watching me. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound authoritative, but my voice cracked, betraying my fear. "This is private property. You need to leave. Now!" No response. I started walking toward him, my flashlight trained on the spot where he stood. My footsteps were loud in the silence, but his figure stayed perfectly still. As I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. He was facing me, but I couldn't see his face. His head was tilted slightly, like he was leaning just enough to peer around the corner. But there was no expression, no detail, just darkness. I took another step forward, my grip tightening on the wrench. Suddenly he moved. In one swift, jerky motion, he stepped out from behind the wall, fully exposing himself. He was tall, too tall, and wearing what looked like construction gear, a hard hat, heavy boots, and a dirty, orange reflective vest. But his face was completely covered in dirt or mud, smeared across his skin like a mask. I could see his eyes, though. They were wide, wild, bloodshot, staring straight at me. Before I could react, he bolted toward me, sprinting down the hallway with terrifying speed. His boots slammed against the concrete, the sound ricocheting off the walls, deafening in the enclosed space. I ran. I didn't even think about it. My body just moved. I turned and sprinted back down the hall, my legs burning as I pushed myself faster than I thought possible. The narrow corridor seemed to stretch endlessly in front of me, the sound of his heavy footsteps chasing me, getting closer. I could hear him breathing now, deep, ragged gasps like he was right behind me. I glanced back over my shoulder, and for a split second I saw him, his outstretched arms reaching for me, fingers dirty and cracked, almost close enough to grab me. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the cold metal railing slick under my sweaty palms. I could hear the man pounding down the steps behind me, relentless, unyielding. I was almost to the exit when I felt it, his hand on my jacket. He grabbed a fistful of fabric and yanked me back. I stumbled, slamming into the wall, my head snapping back from the impact. Pain exploded behind my eyes, but I fought through it, swinging the wrench blindly behind me. I felt the wrench connect with something solid. There was a sickening crunch, and he let out a guttural grunt of pain, releasing me. I didn't wait to see what damage I'd done. I shoved myself off the wall, ran the last few feet to the door, and burst outside into the cold night air. I didn't stop until I reached the security booth at the entrance of the site. My heart was hammering in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, collapsing into the chair, shaking uncontrollably. I radioed the police, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. They searched the building, but found no sign of him, no muddy footprints, no reflective vest, nothing. It was like he had never been there at all. But I know what I saw. I know he was real, and I still wonder, who was he, and what the hell did he want with me? Story 2. The long night at the gas station. I used to work the night shift at a small gas station in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of place you wouldn't think twice about. Just a dusty, old station with flickering fluorescent lights, a single pump island, and nothing but open road on either side for miles. You could drive for hours without seeing another car. It wasn't unusual for nights to be dead quiet. Most people avoided the place once the sun went down. The only regular traffic was the occasional trucker passing through, or someone from the nearby town getting gas on their way home. I never minded the quiet. In fact, I preferred it. Less hassle, fewer customers, and I could just zone out and get through my shift. One night, though, something changed. It was about 2 a.m. when I first saw the car pull in. It was an old, beat-up sedan, the kind you'd see in a junkyard rather than on the road. The car's headlights were dim, almost like they weren't even on, but I could see the faint glow through the dirty windows as it crept toward the pumps. I had a bad feeling as soon as I saw it. The car idled there for a while, longer than it should have, with no one getting out. I leaned forward, squinting through the grimy glass of the station's front window, but I couldn't make out any movement inside. It was just sitting there. Maybe it was someone passed out at the wheel, I thought. It wasn't uncommon for people to pull in drunk or high, too far gone to realize where they were. Still, something felt wrong, like a tight knot in my stomach that I couldn't explain. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the driver's door creaked open. A man stepped out, slowly, almost deliberately. He was tall, wearing a faded hoodie with the hood up and jeans that looked 2 sizes too big. His face was in shadow, and he walked toward the station without making a sound. I don't know why, but I instinctively locked the door as he got closer. He reached the door and stopped, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening for something inside. I could see his breath fogging up the glass in front of him, but his face was still hidden under that hood. He didn't knock or try the handle. He just stood there, staring. At this point, my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to ask him if he needed help, but something in the pit of my gut told me not to. I stayed behind the counter, trying to keep my breathing steady, hoping he would just go away. But he didn't. After what felt like an eternity, He started walking. Not back to his car, though. He walked around the side of the building, disappearing into the darkness behind the station. I lost sight of him almost immediately. The security cameras didn't cover that side of the building, and the thought of that empty, shadowy space back there filled me with dread. I didn't want to check. I didn't want to know what he was doing, but I couldn't just stand there frozen. I grabbed the small flashlight we kept under the counter, hands shaking, and quietly opened the side door to peek around the corner. He wasn't there. I scanned the lot, the pumps, even his car. It was all still, empty. For a second, I thought maybe he had taken off, but then I noticed something. His car was still there, idling. The door was wide open, but he was nowhere to be seen. That's when I heard it. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible at first, but as I strained to listen, it became clearer. Breathing. Shallow, uneven breathing. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the station. I froze. Every hair on my body stood on end. The only door that led inside from the back was supposed to be locked, but somehow, I knew he had found a way in. Slowly, silently, I backed toward the front counter, trying not to make a sound. The breathing got louder, and I realized it was coming from behind the shelves. My heart raced as I reached for the emergency phone behind the register, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. The operator picked up, but before I could say anything, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was creeping toward me. My throat closed up. I whispered into the phone, barely audible, "Someone's inside. Please, please send someone." I couldn't wait. I needed to hide. There was a small storage closet near the back, and I darted inside, shutting the door as quietly as I could. My entire body was shaking, and the air felt thick, suffocating. I could hear him now. His footsteps were right outside the closet, heavy, deliberate. He was searching for me. Time crawled. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, huddled in the dark, trying not to make a sound. Every creak, every shift of the old building felt like it would give me away. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, the handle of the closet door turned slowly, the creaking sound echoing through the cramped space. I could barely breathe. The door didn't open all the way, though. It stopped halfway, just enough for me to see the shadow of someone standing there. Just standing, waiting. And then, as quietly as it had opened, the door closed again. I didn't move. I couldn't. I stayed there, crouched and shaking, until I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The footsteps retreated, and the front door chimed as it swung open. By the time the police arrived, the car was gone. They searched the place but found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing. It was like he had never been there at all. They told me it was probably just some drifter, some guy looking to scare me, but I knew better. I quit the next day. I still can't shake the feeling of him standing there, just inches away, listening, waiting. I still wonder what would have happened if he had opened the door all the way. Story 3. The Woman in the Lot. I was working late one Friday night, covering an overnight shift at the local grocery store. The place was pretty quiet after 9 p.m., so it was just me and 2 other employees, a cashier named Heather and a stocker, Jim, who spent most of his time in the back unloading pallets. I had the easiest job, sitting at the customer service desk, answering the phone if anyone bothered to call, which almost never happened that late. The store was in a small town, tucked away behind a strip mall, and by the time the clock hit midnight, the parking lot outside was a ghost town. The bright fluorescent lights from the parking lot cast these long, harsh shadows on the asphalt, giving the whole place an eerie, hollow feeling. Around 1 a.m., Heather walked over to the desk to let me know she was going on her break, and I gave her a thumbs up. She was taking her usual 15-minute smoke out back by the dumpsters, and it left me alone at the front of the store. I didn't mind. It was peaceful, in a weird, unsettling kind of way. But then, about 5 minutes after Heather left, something caught my eye. There was someone standing just outside the automatic doors, on the edge of the parking lot where the light met the shadows. At first, I thought it might be a customer, though it was rare to get anyone this late, but the way they stood there, motionless, felt off. I squinted, trying to make out any details. The person was just standing there, staring at the store. It was a woman. She was wearing this long, dirty coat, the kind you'd expect from someone living on the streets. Her hair was wild, tangled, and from what I could see of her face, she looked pale, like she hadn't been in the sun for days. She didn't move an inch, didn't make any effort to come closer. Just stood there, watching through the glass doors. I felt this uncomfortable chill crawl up my spine. Something about her presence felt wrong. My gut instinct told me to keep my distance. I thought about calling Jim up front, but he was probably still busy in the stockroom. I figured maybe this woman was just waiting for someone, or maybe she was looking for a place to stay warm. Either way, I decided I'd give her a minute before doing anything. After a couple of minutes, she still hadn't moved. I stood up from the desk, leaning a little closer to the front windows, trying to get a better look. Her eyes, they were locked on me now. Dark, unblinking, almost vacant. I couldn't see her face clearly under the hood of her coat, but the intensity of her stare was unnerving. Then, the doors slid open. She didn't walk in right away. She just took one slow step forward, letting the automatic doors shut behind her, standing just inside the entrance. The way she moved was unnaturally slow, almost deliberate, like every step was being carefully measured. Can I help you?" I called out, my voice sounding more nervous than I intended. No response. She just stood there staring. I could see her face more clearly now. Her skin was stretched tight, sallow, like she hadn't eaten in days. There was something unsettling about her eyes. They were wide, too wide, as if she hadn't blinked in hours. Her lips were cracked, barely visible under the hood, and there was a faint, strange smell, like sour milk, that hit me the closer she got. I glanced over at the register, but Heather wasn't back yet. I was alone. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The store's closed. Still nothing. Then, without a word, she started walking toward me. Her steps were slow but purposeful, her body swaying slightly as she moved. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the empty store, a steady, unnerving rhythm. I felt my heart rate pick up, but I stayed rooted to the spot, gripping the edge of the counter, unsure of what to do. There was something about the way she moved. It wasn't like any normal person. Her legs seemed stiff, like she was forcing herself to walk. My mind raced, trying to figure out what was wrong with her. Was she sick? Hi. Something worse? She got closer. "Ma'am, you need to leave. Now." My voice was shaking, but I couldn't hide it anymore. Suddenly, she stopped. She was about 10 feet away from me, standing in one of the aisles, her head tilted slightly to the side like she was trying to understand something. Her eyes were still locked on me, unblinking, and the air felt thick, heavy, like the entire store had just gone dead silent. Then she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, not at all. It was this grotesque, twisted grin, like her lips were being pulled back too far, revealing teeth that were chipped and yellowed. My stomach flipped, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. But before I could move, she lunged. 1 second, she was standing there, and the next she was rushing toward me with this horrifying speed, her arms outstretched, her hands curled into claws. The sound of her boots slapping against the linoleum filled the store as she charged straight at the counter. I stumbled back, knocking over the chair as I bolted toward the back of the store, my heart hammering in my chest. I could hear her behind me, her ragged breathing getting louder, closer. My brain was in full panic mode, trying to figure out where to go. I needed to find Jim, find Heather, anyone. I turned a corner, running past the empty aisles, and there she was at the end of the aisle, standing in front of the stockroom door, blocking my way. How did she get there so fast? I skid to a stop, my chest heaving, trying to figure out my next move. She was staring at me again, that same twisted grin stretched across her face, her breathing ragged and shallow. Then she said something, her voice raspy and broken. "I need to get out." I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. Before I could react, she lunged again. This time, I didn't run. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a broom leaning against the wall, and swung it at her as hard as I could. The broom connected with her shoulder, sending her stumbling back, but she barely seemed fazed. She let out this guttural, animalistic growl and came at me again. I swung the broom again, this time hitting her in the stomach. She doubled over for a second, wheezing, but I knew it wouldn't stop her for long. That's when I heard the door to the stockroom slam open. Jim burst through, his face pale and wide-eyed. What the hell is going on? She's trying to, I stammered, but before I could finish, the woman spun around, glaring at Jim. Without a second's hesitation, she rushed toward him. Jim grabbed a crowbar from one of the shelves and swung at her, catching her in the ribs with a sickening crack. She crumpled to the ground, gasping, clutching her side. For a moment, everything went still. Then, without a word, she stood up, clutching her broken ribs, staring at us both with that twisted grin still plastered on her face. She backed toward the exit, never taking her eyes off us, her smile growing wider and wider as she disappeared into the night. We called the cops, of course, but they didn't find her. Not a trace. I don't know who she was or why she was there, but something about her words, "I need to get out," still haunts me. It wasn't like she meant out of the store. It felt like she was trying to get out of something far worse. And somehow, we were standing in her way. These stories remind us how fragile our sense of safety really is, especially when the world grows quiet and the shadows grow long. Whether it's a seemingly empty building, a late-night shift, or a silent figure outside your door, sometimes the true horror isn't the unknown. It's realizing what people are truly capable of. The things that really keep you up at night, they don't need to be supernatural. They just need to be real. Now that you've heard these chilling tales, I encourage you to stay vigilant. Keep your doors locked, trust your instincts, and remember, what seems like a small, eerie detail could be the very thing that saves you. If you have your own story to share, don't hold back. Maybe next time, it'll be your story that sends shivers down someone else's spine.